Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are going to now dive into the conversation surrounding Houston Texans wide receiver Stefon Diggs, who has been obviously one of the more prominent figures in the NFL as of these past few years, given his time in Minnesota, where he emerged onto the scene. The Minnesota Miracle, of course, is probably his most signature play of his career, but we've now seen in the past few seasons him force his way out of a couple different situations that have been ultimately, I'm not going to argue that the Viking situation with Kirk Cousins was incredible, but overall it was pretty stable, all things considered, and he just had one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in Josh Allen throwing to him, and it seemed like for a lot of those years he was sort of hinting at his displeasure, and I'm really not sure what it was, because he was one of the most targeted wide receivers in the NFL for a couple seasons, and I thought that they went out of their way almost to some degree as well to try and give him those looks, and ultimately something behind the scenes, he talked about in an interview with GQ Sports that he just appeared on. The article came out on Tuesday afternoon, I believe it was, and he talked about the idea that, in order for him to accomplish his goals, he felt like he needed a change of scenery, which is totally fair. If you are anybody, and this goes beyond sports as well, of course, you have to sort of put yourself in the best position, and be a little bit selfish in terms of where you position yourself for your future, which is totally fair. But Diggs has been, I don't want to say obnoxious about it, but he's been definitely very vocal and a little bit cocky about it as well. And that's totally fine, because honestly, if you're a wide receiver in the NFL, there are just certain positions that you have to have a little bit of arrogance to you. So it's not even like I dislike Stefon Diggs. And if I say that he's cocky, that's not an insult to me. You just have to have that edge a little bit. But to the comment that Anthony Manzano is saying in the comment section right now, there were rumors that apparently he was getting frustrated with Josh Allen not showing up in the playoffs against Kansas City. Not sure if that's BS or if it's actually true. I think that game, though, and that was at this point 2021 is sort of when we started to see a little bit, or 2022, I don't know, whichever playoff year, the year where Diggs took the picture. It was the 2021 AFC Championship game, I think, where he took the picture of the confetti coming down. It'll hit. I think that ultimately that's where we started to see a little bit of frustration from Diggs, and there was a lot of noise headed into last season during the offseason about Diggs and Josh Allen not being on the same page. I think that ultimately, I think it would be unfair of him to specifically say Josh Allen isn't showing up enough. I know that he has had moments where specifically I more so look at that playoff game against the Bengals, and that one was 2021. I have my years all mixed up right now, but I think that was the one where I was maybe more disappointed in him. During that AFC Championship game against the Chiefs, 13 seconds. Like, that's when Josh Allen ended up throwing the game-tying touchdown, and the defense is the one who let it down. But Anthony's comment here, as a football fan, I'm not sure what the difference between arrogance and cockiness is. I've always thought they're the same thing. They're along the lines the same thing. I think it's just a little bit of like some of those words just have a bad connotation to them, but I think ultimately it's just about having attitude, which is another word that can be used in a negative light. But if you're a wide receiver, and really if you're a professional athlete in general, you kind of have to be arrogant and believe that you're the best. And I think where it gets for me with Diggs is when it turns into toxicity a little bit and turning on his teams. And as much as, again, I can defend the attitude and stuff like that, Diggs, even in this interview with GQ Sports, he said, quote, "None of those teams wanted to get rid of me," where, it sounds like Being the general manager of the Bills was not necessarily in line with that he was definitely, wanting to move on from Diggs this past offseason. Again, Diggs has an edge to him, and that's totally fine. I don't love doing the cross-sports comparisons, but Stefon Diggs' career up to this point has been a little bit similar to me as a Jimmy Butler in the NBA. And again, I won't harp on this too long because those cross-sports comparisons can be a little bit messy. But Jimmy Butler is another athlete in American sports that the talent is undeniable, and he has sort of blown up on his teams at times for them not carrying their weight, which is something that, even all of the greats do that to some degree, is, demand excellence out of their teammates as well. And ultimately, Jimmy Butler's career for a while was seeming like he's the problem. The term locker room cancer was being thrown around towards Jimmy Butler, but ultimately kind of seems like he happened to be right in at least some of those instances. And ultimately, once he got to the Heat, where there was that culture and that work ethic, he was ultimately able to fully thrive and have a lot of success. People want to tear down Jimmy Butler, but 2 finals appearances for a Heat team that ultimately, they had their good years without a doubt, but it's not like they were ever world beaters, but they were able to, put together very impressive playoff runs during Jimmy Butler's tenure there in Miami. And I think that there's a little bit of a spinoff to that with Stefon Diggs, where he wasn't happy in Minnesota towards the end there. He was not showing up to meetings, getting fined by the team, and ultimately was, tweeting out about, quote, something needs to change, I think was the exact quote that he had. And ultimately, Diggs, it's a fine way to go about business for yourself in the NFL as long as you can continue to sort of cash the checks you write. But fans are going to be rubbed the wrong way occasionally because of moves like that Diggs has created. And ultimately, what he showed in this GQ interview is that he really doesn't care whatsoever. He said, "I love the noise. I'm a person that enjoys being doubted. I enjoy proving people wrong," which is absolutely fair. I don't know how many people really doubt Stefon Diggs as a wide receiver talent. I don't think that that's ever really been the conversation. I think it more is about the locker room. And, when he adds to that the idea of leaving from Minnesota and Buffalo, he said things had to shake because I kind of wanted them to shake. And that's fair. Again, if you are a person in a work environment that you don't feel like can meet your personal needs, but he's obviously been very public about it all, which does sort of give him that diva label to some degree, especially playing wide receiver as well, that he is definitely not the only wide receiver we've seen in recent history that has been a little bit picky about his destinations. Just ask Antonio Brown and his targets as well. Obviously, all of those things sort of are rolled up into one here, but I think that Diggs, when you go back to the attitude conversation, as Anthony also adds, Terrell Owens is another excellent example of that. You can go through. There's just, it's kind of how it is. You have these players, and I think that especially in a position as well, like wide receiver, where you only have a certain amount of opportunities, all these other things have to break right for you. And then when you aren't getting the looks, even though you are getting open, or at least, Diggs is probably always thinks that he's open, but when you aren't able to cash out on those opportunities, it's a very frustrating process. But we're talking about attitude and such. Anthony in the comment section says, I'm going to use 3 players at the quarterback position that applied to what we're talking about with the confidence but not cocky or arrogant. Drew Brees, Tom Brady, and Peyton Manning. I would even argue, Tom Brady was a little bit cocky as well. I think that ultimately it's finding that balance of you can view the world of yourself personally. It's just a matter of when you take it out on teammates. And that's where Diggs loses me a little bit with this whole situation with the Bills, because and the stats do not back up what I'm about to say. This is an eye test thing. I've gone through it trying to find the numbers that would support that the Bills were actually better in the second half of last season when they stopped trying to force feed Diggs. Ultimately, Josh Allen's numbers went down and the team's overall points per game went down. So, I again, for whatever it's worth, I thought that the Bills did look better when they weren't trying to force feed Diggs, and ultimately that obviously does not bode well for the relationship that already seemed to be a little bit shaky at the start anyways, headed into the season. So now Diggs heads to Houston, and he has sort of a lot to prove to everybody to some degree. Again, it's not about him being a good talent, because we are a great talent, because we know that already. It's more so about the idea of, can you keep a cool head and help contribute to a winning organization? And this is a Texans team that is up and coming. They're very young across the board. He's going to go in as the veteran with that team. And the attitude that he has is going to be exceptionally important for him. And sort of one other wide receiver comparison I'll make is Devontae Adams last year. After a win against the Patriots, he talked about his frustration, and he said that his legacy isn't measured in wins and losses, it's measured by greatness, which is definitely an arrogant thing to say. But at the same time, after watching, at least personally, watching the Receiver show that was just released on Netflix, I kind of understood his point of view by the end of it, talking about it's about the process. If the offense looks terrible and you're a wide receiver not getting your targets, you're going to be frustrated. When you're not getting your targets, but you are winning and you are having a positive impact, it's a lot easier to stomach the fact that you don't have all of the counting stats along with it. The issue for Diggs is he kind of did have the counting stats, and the Bills weren't winning games because of it. And they started winning games more when they did start to look elsewhere. But again, I think ultimately Diggs, this is probably a 1-year stint in Houston where he is going to stop by. I don't think that they're going to have the money to pay him long term, given that they have so many young players that eventually they're going to have to cash out on. So I'm very curious to see, what this upcoming season looks like for Diggs in a new role with a new team and different expectations, where he's also not the only wide receiver like he was in Buffalo, where there really wasn't that much supplemental talent. Now there are a bunch of mouths to feed in Nico Collins, and you have Tank Dell, who had an excellent rookie season before getting hurt. Dalton Schultz, they just signed to a contract extension. So how is Diggs going to respond to the criticism that surrounded him in the past handful of months? I guess we'll have to see. But again, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We are now going to be switching gears here and going from the actual field itself. I want to share some thoughts that I have from the Chicago Bears Hard Knocks season that just saw its finale come to a close last night. So we'll talk about what I saw from Hard Knocks in general and my takeaways as a whole. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.